Good evening, and thank you for joining me. Tonight's message I've entitled, A Challenge to Belief. In the book of Exodus, we are introduced to several pharaohs, but are not given any of their names. This and other issues have caused scholarly debates and have presented challenges and controversy. There are no archaeological historical records that help clear up this matter. There is silence about the event from the Egyptian records. Charles F. Ayling gives us an explanation for the silence, saying the people of the ancient Near East kept historical records to impress their gods and also potential enemies, and therefore rarely, if ever, mention defeats or catastrophes. And here we're looking at the Exodus. Records of disasters would not enhance the reputation of the Egyptians in the eyes of their gods, nor make the enemies more afraid of their military might. The Egyptians frequently took a very idealistic view of their history. And since Pharaoh was inseparably connected with the course of events as they occurred in Egypt, it was very rare that failures relating to him were ever recorded. See, Pharaoh was regarded by the Egyptians as Lord of the world and a god. And this is important for us to keep in mind when we're reading about the Exodus, when we're reading about the Hebrews there in Egypt. It's important for us to recognize who the Pharaoh saw himself to be and who the Egyptians saw the Pharaoh to be. They regarded the Pharaoh as Lord of the world and a god. This concept of their king would decidedly affect their historiography. To understand fully the silence of Egyptian documents regarding the enslavement and exodus of the Hebrews, it is important for us to understand the Egyptians' view of the state, the statehood, the place where they lived, the state, and the king. Henry Frankfurt summarizes the viewpoint, stating that the Egyptian state was not a man-made alternative to other forms of political organization. It was in a league of its own. It was God-given, established when the world was created. And it continued to form part of the universal order. In the person of Pharaoh, a superhuman being had taken charge of the affairs of man. This is how they view the Pharaoh, as a superhuman being who, here he is placed in charge. He is taken charge of the affairs of man. And this great blessing, which ensured the well-being of the nation, having a Pharaoh there on the throne, this great blessing which ensured the well-being of the nation was not due to a fortunate accident, but had been foreseen in the divine plan. You see, they see the state with the Pharaoh all being orchestrated, all being part of a divine plan. Their monarchy, which is what it is, it was a monarchy. This monarchy was as old as the world, for the Creator himself had assumed kingly office on the day of creation. They believe this Creator King here, was his role, and he passed it down to each Pharaoh in succession. So Pharaoh was this divine king's successor. He was his descendant and his successor. We see this with monarchy about divine right, and this is how the Egyptians viewed it, as a divine right, that Pharaoh was this descendant and successor from the Creator himself, who took a kingly office. And so a quick recap of this Egyptian belief system. We see Pharaoh was regarded as Lord of the world and as God. a superhuman being who inherits a monarchy that, in the Egyptian view, is established by their God. And this is what is essentially, this is what is Moses' task here. This is what he's up against, that Moses and Yahweh confront and challenge. This Egyptian system of belief that views Pharaoh as divine king and the state ruled by the Pharaoh as part of divine plan and divine order. After careful research and in reviewing some of the evidence that we do have, we can discover who the likely candidates are for the Pharaoh here in the book of Exodus. Let us take a quick look here at the history of the Egyptian kings, beginning with Amos there in the 18th dynasty. Amos is generally regarded as the first king of the 18th dynasty, which probably was to become the greatest age in all Egyptian history. Amos was succeeded by his son Amenhotep I. Amenhotep I, who was followed by his daughter's husband, Thutmose I. Thutmose campaigned vigorously in the south to Nubia and as far north as the Euphrates River, thus reestablishing Egyptian control over Syro-Palestinian territory. When Thutmose first died, there was no surviving male heir, so his daughter, Queen Hatshepsut, seized the throne and ruled Egypt for approximately 21 years. See, he had no male heir, so his daughter became Queen Hatshepsut. And there she served and ruled Egypt for 21 years, even though during much of that time there was a legitimate heir to the throne in the person of Thutmose III. Because of his young age, however, and the powerful influence that Hatshepsut had, he had to watch from the sidelines. It's the view of some that Queen Hatshepsut was the one responsible for caring for Moses in the early years. Following her rule, Thutmose III finally regained the throne as sole ruler and was destined to become one of Egypt's greatest. When he took the throne, he expressed to the fullest extent his resentment for having been kept so long in a minor position by destroying the representations in the name of Hatshepsut wherever these appeared on monuments in Egypt. See his resentment here. He goes on a rampage, just destroying everything that has her name or everything that represented her. He goes on this rampage and he has this resentment and just clears everything. Doesn't want to have any remembrance of her at all. He also he renewed the military activity. This king, Thutmose III, he renewed military activity in Syro-Palestine in the form of at least 16 campaigns, taking him as far north as the Euphrates. In this regard, he continued the policies of his grandfather, Thutmose I, who had initiated the subjugation of Asiatic provinces for Egypt. If this early date that we are looking at here, if this early date is true, which is around 1445 BC of the Exodus, if this is the correct one, Thutmose III would likely be the candidate for the Pharaoh of the oppression. the oppression that we read about of the Israelites there, the Hebrews, as they were oppressed and had overlords over them. Thutmose III would likely be that candidate there for that Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of the oppression. This king was on the throne at the time of Moses' flight that we have been discussing, when Moses left Egypt, when he was a fugitive, when he was running away. This king was on the throne at that time, the time of Moses' flight from Egypt. And this king died approximately 30 to 40 years later, which permitted Moses to return. You remember God said to Moses that those who were in power, those who were looking at killing Moses, had died. And it may have well been that this vengeance of this king, this Thutmose III, it may have well been that the vengeance sought upon Moses was not due only to Moses' murder of an Egyptian official, but also to his possible association with Queen Hatshepsut. Following the death of Thutmose III, his son, Amenhotep II, took the throne and ruled for at least 26 years. Amenhotep II. This king, according to the early date of the Exodus, would have been the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and the one who lost his firstborn son in the final judgment of God. And this is what we read about in the book of Exodus, where we pick up there at the last few verses that we looked at there on Sunday. This is what we read in Exodus chapter 4, verse 21. The Lord said to Moses, "When you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart, so that he will not let the people go. Then say to the Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go, so he may worship me. But you refuse to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son." The death of Amenhotep's firstborn son would mean a successor would have to come from elsewhere. And there are historical records that match up with this account. Some have seen a relationship between the death of Amenhotep's firstborn son and the well-known dream stela of Thutmose IV, his son and successor to the throne. In this document, the god Har-Em-Akak promised the throne to Thutmose II on the condition that he restored the exposure of the Great Sphinx, which apparently had been largely covered by drifting sand. It is their view that this dream stela represents an attempt at legitimizing his right to the throne, since he was apparently not the firstborn son. Amenhotep II, the likely candidate for the Pharaoh that Moses confronts, was a very energetic and skillful king. He is known to us in Egyptian history as a capable warrior and sportsman who distinguished himself in rowing and horsemanship and in archery. The mummy of this king was found in 1898 in the Valley of the Kings at Thebes, along with his famous bow, which he boasted that no other man could draw. What is of significance is the fact that, according to the early date, the exodus from Egypt took place during the zenith of Egyptian power, prestige, and glory. This fact, coupled with the idea of the unique nature of God's intervention for his people, made this one of the most memorable events in Hebrew history. Here we see the challenge. We see the challenge that Moses faces. We see the challenge that Moses faces as God's divine appointed representative. He confronts and challenges the belief system and supposedly divine appointed kingdom and rule of the Pharaoh. God, the true God of heaven and earth, challenges the Pharaoh's sovereignty and right to rule. He challenges the Pharaoh's authority and governorship over the lives of the people, his people. Pharaoh sees the Hebrews as his property, slaves in his kingdom, those he commands and rules over as part of a caste system. He believes that he has this divine right as a king, whose belief is that slaves will continue to be his personal slaves in the afterlife. And this the Pharaoh does not wish to give up. His heart is hard, and he easily dismisses Moses and his claim. It will take more than just words to change the Pharaoh's heart and mind. His beliefs has been deeply entrenched into his heart. He believes that he has divinely been appointed and positioned on earth as a God, and that it is his right, his divine right and station in life to rule and reign, and that it is under his might and power and by his might and power that things happen or don't. And he will not give up his power and determination easily, not without a fight. His entire belief system, his way of being, is at stake. Dear friends, I hope that this message has been a blessing to you, and I pray and hope that you have a blessed rest of your week. Until next time, bye-bye.